Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome to the second day and the fifth and last session of the Geneva Toxic Free Talks. This event is organized in hybrid mode with attendees with us here at the Centre Administratif de la Vendée and a few more online. As I've been keeping repeating at the beginning of each of these sessions every fall, we are delighted to welcome the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights to Geneva as he reports to the Council on issues related to his mandate. We take this occasion to organize the Geneva Toxic Free Talks on the sidelines of the Human Rights Council. This is a good opportunity in the year to harness and reflect on the challenges posed by the production, use, and dissemination of toxics, and how Geneva contributes to bringing together the actors working in reversing the toxic tide. This year's Geneva Toxic Free Talks took place over 2 days, with conferences and discussions celebrating the important milestone of the 25th anniversary of the mandate and the struggle for the right to live in a toxic-free environment. Today's dialogues looked at repairing toxic damages, and the last event that you are attending now will discuss the challenge of warfare and war zones toxicity. Before I give the floor to the moderator, Isadore, the Geneva representative of Earth Justice and co-organizer of these talks, let me remind for those who are online with us or will later watch this video, that the summary and the video of the event will be available as usual on the link that is being shared with my colleagues, or that is available on the page. Who is online with us as we are going live with the event can also raise this question in the Q&A box, and if we have time, we will address them in the discussion session of this event. Yves, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you to you and to your team of the Geneva Environmental Network, without whom we would not be able to have this dialogue or even to have had this Geneva Toxic Free Talks. So as you said, this is the last and final dialogue, which is concluding these 2022 Geneva Toxic Free Talks. Yesterday, we've been celebrating the 25 years of the mandate, this mandate being the oldest environmental mandate of the Human Rights Council. And today we have started already with the first dialogue, and we're spending some time on exploring some of the issues on which the mandate has been already spending some time, and also trying to see what are the perspectives today on some of these emerging issues. In the previous discussion we had, in the previous dialogue, we discussed a lot about legacy. It was more about all the stockpiles, and how do we get rid of them? How do we deal also with plastic dissemination? So the question of legacy is definitely one of the issues, and as you said, Marcos or Alana, is one of the issues of this mandate. Now, in this second dialogue, we're also going to look at some legacy issues, but this time coming from conflicts, older conflicts, but also, unfortunately, ongoing conflicts. We're going to have an example coming from the Marshall Islands, and another one in the second part on Ukraine. So starting with the Marshall Islands, it is an issue of the day here in the Human Rights Council, because a resolution has been or is going to be tabled, at least is right now in the discussion, on the human rights aspects of the legacy of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. So we have the pleasure and the honor to have with us two prominent representatives of the Marshall Islands, Guillaume Charon and Samuel Landry. And just to say also that the negotiations and the discussions are led by Robin Manny, who is representing Fiji, and we had hoped to have her with us. We hoped that she would be able to be with us, but unfortunately, due to the very heavy schedule in the Human Rights Council, she was not able to join, and she thought that anyway, with you two gentlemen, the issue would be very, very well presented. But unfortunately, then we don't have the real gender balance, which anyway would not really be in balance, but at least a better representation. So I'd like to apologize for that, but it's really linked to the context in which we are operating in the Human Rights Council. The diversity is perhaps not here, but the quality is. So I'll turn to you both, gentlemen. I don't know which one of you want to start with, but so that you can present us the situation. Why are you presenting this resolutions? What are you expecting out of this resolution, and all of the different elements about, unfortunately, the legacy that the peoples of the Marshall Islands have to live with today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, to acknowledge the organizers themselves for justice. That's from Geneva Environment Network, and distinguished speakers, fellow speakers present here in the room, with participants both in person and online. So we were asked to come and share a bit on our initiative. And before I do that, just a brief history to sort of put all of this in context of the gathering or the talks that have been going on the last couple of days. Toxic Free Talks. So for today's side event, notably it's about war zones and conflicts. But from our side, things, given that the nuclear test that the resolution is about testing took place post-war, during the post-war era. Nevertheless, for us, it's arguably, some can say the aftermath can be still into war zone environment, given the severely adverse impacts of the testing and the ensuing radiation fallout. So the Marshall Islands has become what was known as the Pacific Proving Grounds. And I'm going to use exact words that were used at the time, quote unquote, for the good of mankind and to end all wars. So reasoning behind the conduct of these nuclear tests. So these tests happened between 1946 and 1958. It's a period of 12 years. And to put it in further context, the strength of the blast, notably the strongest was 1.5 times the Hiroshima blast, going on it every day for 12 years. That's putting that in context. So this was during a time when we were under UN trusteeship, and as such, we had not yet become a state, nationhood. We had attained that will come later, obviously, but there was a lot of highly classified information from them for even after the conduct of these tests. And in terms of the reporting that came out of the tests, following that era, we've come to find out, a lot, most if not all of them were not peer reviewed, the reports that were being put out. So there was a lot of underestimation, skewed estimates, and so in our view, we're very biased insofar as the post-testing and reports that were coming out. So on to the resolution, the draft resolution that we're going to table next week on Wednesday. It's got elements of transitional justice in there. Of course, the pillars of which include truth, justice, reparations, guarantees of non-recurrence. Just recently, the realization. Bottom line, we are seeking this being an item 10 resolution. We're seeking technical assistance and capacity from the OACHR, the council, to the OACHR, to help our national capacity. We do have a national nuclear commission that was established some 5 years ago. That I will speak to when we come to the stuff. But just to enhance their capacity to be able to apply human rights methods on this issue, this nuclear legacy in the Marshall Islands. There hasn't been any recognition of some of the harm done. People continue to suffer. And so we figured, as a member of the council, we seized the opportunity using our membership to share our story through this draft resolution. Now, some have already said that, or have been saying that this is a new issue for the council, and even some have questioned whether the council is the appropriate UN body to address the human rights implications of our nuclear legacy. Words we respectfully digress. Certainly, as a resolution, it could be new to some, but not the issue itself, as it dates back some 10 years ago to the report of the then Special Rapporteur on Toxics, following his visit to the Marshall Islands in 2012. So one of his recommendations actually prompted the establishment of the commission that I was referring to, the National Nuclear Commission, to focus on, at the national level, on issues arising that came out of the nuclear testing era, the legacy that has been ongoing. Since then, it has been referenced in numerous reports, more recent reports, I would say, notably the joint collaboration between SRs Orellana and Dr. Boyd, that made reference to sacrifice zones presented earlier this year during the 49th session. And just the fact that we're here having this conversation this afternoon with the SR and Toxics present and all other stakeholders is testament, I think, to the cross-cutting issues and interlinkages between toxics and human rights. And the need to have more open dialogue moving forward. Even though they can get challenging, very difficult, as these conversations can get at times. So our core group, comprising the Marshall Islands, Fiji, Nauru, Samoa, and Vanuatu, 5 PSIDS missions based here in Geneva. Pacific SIDS, we look forward to further engagement. As Steve said, our second informal is in about an hour at the Palais, for which I will have to rush off to. But we thought we would come and participate and contribute to these very timely talks, toxic-free discussions. So with that, I will hand over to my colleague Guillaume to speak on some of the broader environmental issues associated with what I've just said, the nuclear legacy, but more specifically also the draft resolution currently under discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jesus. Guillaume?
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for the organizers. Thank you to the Special Rapporteur for the time and for the interest in the plight of the Marshall Islands. I think that I won't be as long as Ambassador Sam has been, but I will simply say that put it in context. First, people have to realize that when Sam mentioned there is 1.5 time Hiroshima detonation for 12 years, it also means that atolls and islands were completely pulverized into thin air. There's nothing left of some of these. So we have the disappearance of land which was inhabitable before. In addition, we have the atolls and the areas that remain that have been contaminated so much so that they're now uninhabitable for thousands of years. All the population in all these islands were displaced, and they remain displaced to this very day, with very little chance, with no chance of going back, and very little support actually. in addition to the population which is coming from those areas and have been directly affected, obviously the entirety of the country has been affected, not only in terms of managing assistance and providing assistance to those that were permanently displaced, but in addition, the rest of the population itself suffers from disproportionate rates of cancer in the entirety of the population. It affects the right to food, to water, to reproductive health. All of these rights are directly impacted with a country that was neither independent, therefore could not make its own decision as to the willingness to conduct those tests over there, nor has the capacity to this day to address the situation from a health perspective, from a human rights perspective, and from the well-being of its population. I would add, and this is you hinted at that, Sam, one important dimension is the environmental dimension. To give you so the US after that, the fallout, the nuclear residue were put into a dome called the Lunet Dome, which is a 100-meter diameter dome. I think that's on one of the atolls. It's hardly 1 meter above sea level. And they dumped all of the waste back in that time in that dome. And in addition, they also, information has it that they also put some of the Nevada tests residue over there. That dome is now leaking, and even if it's not leaking, there is water intrusion into there. This is an area where a lot of the tuna fishing of the world goes through. So there is a direct contamination in the Pacific. This is not something that a country like the Marshall Islands can address, nor can it be really adequately held responsible for the situation, given that it did not cause it and is unable to mitigate that. To give you an example, the Marshall Islands doesn't really have the capacity to just monitor health-wise and detect cancer rates in its own countries. It's mostly when people are going abroad and that they have to be treated over there. So there is a clear problem also with the right to a healthy and sustainable environment in this situation. And then that doesn't affect just the Marshall Islands, but also the export when it comes to food, like such as tuna, or as you know, the sea. Everything that goes through that area would be contaminated. I say would be, not that I am doubting that it is, but there is no monitoring and nothing that is being done in order to trace this toxicity that is being spelled out everywhere in the Pacific. I'd like to underscore something that is particularly important for the Marshall Islands and also for other small island developing states, is that these are countries that are acutely dependent on their environments for their development and their sustainability. It's not like there are a lot of alternatives in terms of land or in terms of resources, because they are very finite in such a small environment. And that has a direct impact also when considering sea level rise as well, which is likely to reduce the amount of land available for the population. And therefore, this has already reduced significantly some of the options not only in terms of habitability, but also in terms of seeking out food or means of subsistence. Finally, I'd like to say, because this may be of interest to the Special Rapporteur and the rest of the conversation, while the resolution is focused on the nuclear legacy of the Marshall Islands, there are other islands and areas in the countries which also have been affected by unexploded ordinances since World War II. And there too, the Marshall Islands doesn't have the capacity to eliminate and get rid of those unexploded ordinances, or as they call USOs, and would need international assistance in doing so. And I think that these UXOs are a problem and a phenomenon which affects many countries, and something worth looking into. Yes, I think I will leave it at that. Thank you.
If I may just briefly conclude our intervention there. joint presentation. Just as I mentioned, we have to rush off to the Pally in a few minutes. But just to once again acknowledge the special rapporteur and the other speakers. We greatly appreciate the invitation and we value for this valuable opportunity to speak and contribute to these very timely talks. We again acknowledge the speakers, organizers, and everyone here in the room, also as well as online. And we wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for being with us. I'll give the floor very quickly to the special rapporteur so that you can hear him before you join the informal. But just BC, because you did, Mr. the Deputy High Representative, you did say that there are some questions whether this belongs to the Human Rights Council. So let's be very clear that it does. What you have described is an incredibly blunt and one of the worst explicit denial of equality of rights among human people. So this is one of the very very high and hot issues of decolonizations, and definitely it needs to be discussed in the Human Rights Council. And I want to thank you for bringing this, and this should have been discussed in the Human Rights Council actually much earlier. So again, talking about legacy and perspective, this is quite a big issue. So I'll turn to the special rapporteur. Some of his previous work, not only to the previous work of the mandate, but also your work, Marcos or Elena, has been mentioned. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves. If I could, first of all, thank once again the Geneva Environment Network and Earth Justice for putting together these Geneva Toxic Free Talks that allow us to converse about these very topical issues. I want to thank Excellency Mr. Samuel Langui, also Guillaume Chiron, a distinguished delegate, for coming here today and sharing with us their perspectives and information about the situation at the Republic of the Marshall Islands. As you mentioned, the mandate, the Toxics and Human Rights Mandate, has engaged these issues in the past. If we look back at 2007, one of my predecessors already produced a report on armed conflict and toxics. In 2012, as was referred, one of my predecessors conducted a country visit with recommendations. And in 2022, so a few months ago, in collaboration with David Boyd, we put out a report looking at the right to a toxic-free environment as an element, a substantive element of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And this in addition to press releases, statements. And so, Yves, to echo your point, this topic is not outside the work of the Council. It belongs outright in the toxics mandate as it relates to toxics. And why is that? Some people have said in regards to other cases and in other situations, legacy issues are issues of the past. We have current problems. Why get stuck in the past? Why not look into the future? And this, in a way, is sophism or is misleading, because when it comes to legacy toxics issues, the chemical composition of some of the pollutants and some of the toxics that are involved, their persistence, the latency, these are not just situations that happened decades ago, or these are situations that have implications today. That's right. There may not be testing today, at least not in the same way that it used to, but the contamination is there, and the contamination affects people, and the impacts of that contamination become worse in time because of this latency. And so the issues, they aggravate, they don't resolve themselves. And so they need to be tackled deliberately. And the mandate is a tool to intentionally and deliberately tackle them. In thinking about the scope that's involved here, it is quite broad. We're looking at weapons, and that involves manufacture, and that concerns workers, that concerns the proliferation of contaminated sites in many countries. there's of course testing, and the testimony that His Excellency Mr. Langwe has put on the table is indeed compelling. There are questions of conflict that are going on or have also been recently subsided and those have international dimensions. We are to hear about the situation in the Ukraine in a few minutes, but also maybe internal. I was recently in an academic visit in Colombia, where the issues of the legacy of the internal armed conflict and the effort at peace building there are very much now on the table with the implementation of the peace accords concluded between the state and the guerrillas at the time. So in relation to this broad scope, this issue will continue to be in the mandate's agenda. We will continue to think about and explore ways in which the mandate can usefully inject its expertise and visibility. I want to thank you, Excellency, for once again invited me to the Marshall Islands to conduct a new country visit after 10 years. It's something that is very much appreciated. With that, I want to give it back to you, Yves. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus. And I think this is some of elements of the discussion that are coming in the coming days. I mean, in the coming hours, and then in the coming days. Definitely, you can count on the special procedure and on the civil society organizations community to make sure that this continues to be discussed in the appropriate manner. And we look forward for the final negotiation and the adoption of this resolution by the Human Rights Council. Thank you really for having been with us. I know you have to rush back for the informals. I'll be also looking forward to join you a bit later at these discussions. Thank you for having been with us.
Thank you for having us. Happy to continue the engagement with the Geneva Environmental Network, yourself and the special rapporteur. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much again. And so now we'll turn to another situation, which of course is perhaps closer to our thoughts because we hear about it every day. Quite an unfortunate situation also with, we can already see some important damages and also worrying elements of coming legacy. So we are turning to the situation of Ukraine. The Ukrainian situation is, of course, mainly seen through the angle of the conflicts, the battles which are going on, the impact on the civilian population, the fact that it's an aggression and in a full violation of international law. But there's one aspect which is unfortunately not always that well covered. It's the environmental dimension of that. And we have the privilege to have with us Nikolai Denisov, who is the deputy head of ZOI. And ZOI is one of the leading organizations in, I would say, mapping, in a very precise way, mapping environmental issues, providing us schemes and models to understand what is going on in the atmosphere. And on the top of that, ZOI is one of the organizations that has a very strong specialization in what used to be the former Soviet Union area. You have done a number of works and done great maps on the situation around the Fergana Valley, which affects a number of countries, former Soviet republics. And recently, you have started to publish some and to follow some of the environmental developments of the war and the aggression in Ukraine. So it's a privilege to have you with us and to help us understand what is going on and to have this view about the environmental dimension about a conflict that we hear about every day, but we don't always see all of its impact and all of its dimension. So Nikolai, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for all your work. I can already say it because I've seen good parts of it, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves, and thanks for your appreciation for inviting us. It's a privilege for us, dear colleagues, excellencies. Before I move to a more structured overview, I would like to set the tone by showing you a short animation. The animation is based on our work on collecting data about the damage from the war on Ukraine to the environment. In particular, it looks at how industry infrastructure has been targeted, shelled, disrupted from the very beginning of the war. Now it's more than 200 days. The whole thing started the end of February. So it shows the timeline and it gives a pretty good idea of what the situation is on the ground in terms of the impacts on the industry and infrastructure, all of which has potential environmental implications. So please, if you can launch the animation.
Місто вогні, серце болить, втомлює бій, і ворог не спить. Кулі летять, поки падає сніг, і ворог лежить, мовчить. Ночі без сну нам не холодно, чекає сім'я на околицях. Разом ми всі переможемо, це наша рідна земля. Хай буде весна, там, де ми стоїмо до кінця, і нас не зламає війна. Наша віра єднає серця, Україна навіки жива. Україна – це наша земля. Україна єднає серця.
Thank you. We can move to the presentation. I present a non-profit environmental organization based here in Geneva. We specialize on various environmental issues. The main idea is to provide information and communication so that the environment can be explained better, can be understood better, and eventually to trigger action. Among other things, we pay particular attention to the connection between the environment and non-environmental areas, health, security, and then human rights, of course, is one of these areas which definitely have environmental dimensions. So it has been very important for us for years to stay in contact with this group. It's not the first time we are in this meeting, and I think it's a very important dimension to pay attention to. Specifically, or geographically, as you already has said, we work a lot in Europe's neighborhoods, in the eastern and the southern neighborhoods, also including the Middle East. So we also work globally. Thematically, we cover most of the environmental themes from climate change to biodiversity, including chemicals and waste, which is the main interest of this group. And then environment and security is one of the things we have been working on for years. And of course, it's no wonder that when the war in Ukraine started, we have paid particular attention to the situation there. The annual report, in fact, contains more information about that. I have a few copies with me. It's also online. So whoever is interested, very welcome to approach me and pick a copy. Now, moving to specifically work in Ukraine and around Ukraine. Back to 2007, we have been part of something which was known as the Environmental Security Initiative, which is a joint venture of several UN agencies, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, several other international organizations. And one of the main ideas has been to map out the areas and the dimensions where conflict and environments are actually or potentially connected. And then on this map of Eastern Europe is one of the regions where the initiative operated. It also worked in Central Asia. You've mentioned the Fergana Valley, the Caucasus and the Balkans. But Eastern Europe was one of the areas. And on this map, you see to the left, you see the so-called priority areas, where we thought at the time environment and security issues kind of connect and potentially may trigger something. And if you look at this map from 2007, and if you compare it with what we see today, the correlation is unfortunately quite strong. Now, Ukraine was one of the countries with the map on the right, where we actually looked at very specific environment and security related issues and hotspots and connections. It includes some of the things which were already then at the attention of the UN Special Rapporteur on toxics and human rights. For example, the illegal import into Ukraine of acid tars from Hungary. That's one of the issues which we also picked up at the time working with the Ukrainian NGOs. So in fact, it was a pretty comprehensive compilation of things. That was 2007. When the Donbass war started in 2014, we, of course, immediately started monitoring that. Given that Donbass was one of the hotspots that we identified at the beginning, and we actually have worked with the regional authorities, environmental authorities, trying to help strengthen environmental governance, environmental monitoring, in order to eventually sort of improve the environmental governance in the area as part of the overall governance, because we believe that doing that would also help dissolve some of the tensions which happened, which did exist between, at that time, Donetsk, Luhansk, and the center in Kiev. So that was attention at the time. When the war started, we immediately started monitoring the situation, very much in cooperation with the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So these are some of the results of that, some of the publications that came out jointly. And in terms of the tangible observations, these are some examples. What we see is effectively the concentration of industry in Donbass, which was and is, well, until very recently, was the most industrialized part of Ukraine, and actually probably in Europe. It's a highly industrialized area with a lot of heavy industry, a lot of coal mining, and all that, of course, got immediately affected by the hostilities, has been affected since 2014. It includes the mass-scale flooding of Donbass coal mines. Last time that happened during World War II, the Germans flooded the mines, and then they had to the water had to be pumped for a long time in order to reestablish production. So the same happened now, which brings significant environmental and human risks to the population and to the infrastructure of the region, but also the impacts on the overall industrial infrastructure simply by massive disruptions, significant threats to the facilities, to waste storage or location, etc., etc. And then maybe not that connected to the work of this group, lower right corner, that the impact of nature, of course. Donbass is not an industry, it's a very green place, in fact, with many protected areas. And then all of that nature, of course, got affected, both directly and through fires and through disruption of the work of environmental authorities. So that was a mass, widespread damage to nature and to capacities to protect it. When the war started in February this year, we have seen very similar things. This map was produced 1 month after the war. It's actually part of this report, inset here, which you can see in detail if you're interested. We started monitoring that as well, and what we have seen are very similar things to what we've seen on Donbass. Basically, air pollution from attacks on fuel depots, on facilities and cities, contamination of water with the related health effects and transboundary effects potentially, because part of the rivers in this area are transboundary. In fact, most of Ukraine's rivers are transboundary. Destruction of lands for agriculture, large volumes of rubble, toxic waste in cities, again, connection to health, disruption of access to critical natural resources like water and also gas, of course, electricity, etc., damage to ecosystems, flora, fauna, and severe impediments to the normal work of environmental authorities, which cannot monitor normally, which cannot manage normally, which cannot control things, which cannot control the situation in protected areas. So this all brings a lot of challenges for Ukrainian environment. And then, of course, there is a global dimension in several ways. One is that, unfortunately, attention to the war does distract attention for global environmental problems. That's objective facts. And secondly, there are direct impacts. For example, the carbon footprint of the war is yet to be studied, but it is significant, both due to the armed operations as they are directly, but also through impacts on industries and in cities, and the release of large amounts of greenhouse gases through that, and of course also destruction of carbon sinks. Like forest fires do destroy the capacity of forests to absorb carbon. So all this is yet to be analyzed, but definitely there is an impact there. And the difference from Donbass, the similarity that we have seen this before, the difference is the scale. The scale is much, much larger. You have already seen the video. This shows the situation in cities per the end of August. We have registered from open sources, I think the order of 14,000 incidents in Ukrainian cities, and more than 1,000 Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages. This is not everything. I'm sure that we are sure that there are more incidents that we did not yet capture, but it shows the scale overall. And this is not only direct destruction, direct hits, direct shelling. It's also the disruption of access to critical resources and disruption of normal sort of work, municipal work, which relates to waste and other environmental dimensions. But still, most of the incidents are related to direct physical damage. The yellow part of the diagram. And then we have seen the industry in the animation. So this is again the picture per today. Again, the majority is physical damage. And so by now we have about 800 incidents of different kinds and about 400 facilities and infrastructural objects. And again, this is the conservative estimate. The actual number is of course higher, but at least this is firmly documented. And then if we look at what it means, this is a fairly qualitative still assessment of environmental potential of the risks which are associated with the disruptions and with the damage. On the basically what you get here, the relative level of environmental risk, and of course there is no surprise that we have Donbass in the east as the area of concentration of these risks. And Mariupol in the south, very famous by now, unfortunately, where we have a strong impact. And Zaporizhia, also with the nuclear power plants in the south as well, which is also area where we have the highest potential for environmental issues to be to play out. A few examples. These are parts of our series of thematic briefings we do with Conflict and Environment Observatory in the UK, which is known to this group probably through its previous incarnation, the Toxic Remnants of War, Toxic Remnants of War projects, which they run for years. So we do together the thematic assessments, and the first briefing was a nuclear threats. Ukraine is a nuclear generation country. It's a fairly unique situation where the modern war is waged in such a context, such an environment. And lately, due to the situation around the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, the involvement of IAEA, of course, it became very well known, very well covered. But it remains an issue, it remains imminent threat. And even though the assessments of the actual danger, the scale of danger vary very broadly, The threat is definitely there, and Chernobyl or not, but it can lead to nuclear accidents of fairly significant scale, and the rest depends on circumstances, the meteorology, the technology, the level of protection. Zaporizhia is better protected than Chernobyl. It's more modern reactors with higher degree of protection against accidents, but it was not planned for war. So any serious accident at the station definitely can lead to issues, and it's not the only nuclear power plant, and it's not the only nuclear facility. And then water definitely is sorry, I'm switching slides for me, but not for you. So water is definitely an important dimension, and there's a toxic dimension as well. First of all, many industries have been hit which have a connection to water bodies, which use water bodies, or which dispose of their sort of waste products into water bodies. The same for municipal wastewater treatments. There are documented cases of wastewater facilities damaged and targeted. And then, of course, we have the toxic tailings in tailing ponds throughout Ukraine in the major basins of surface water bodies. And these tailing ponds eventually present very significant threats. And we already have seen accidents in Ukraine in the last 10, 20 years, where dams of the tailing ponds were damaged. And it led to significant contamination, for example, the Dniester River in the west. So any significant accidents at such a facility, of which many are in the Dnieper River, the main river which goes through the areas where active combat is happening now, that can potentially lead to very significant toxic impacts on waters, rivers, and eventually the seas. So it's also a transboundary dimension there. Forest fires, again, not maybe the issue for this group, but it definitely is a casualty. You see the map from the Donbass area, where you can very easily trace the front line by the intensity of the forest fires. And as a matter of fact, it has been shown recently that the incidence, the intensity of forests burning in terms of area per percentage of the area of forests which are burning, have burned in the beginning of the conflict, is 10 times higher in Ukraine within the combat zone, within the war zone, than outside, which is a very significant difference. And it's 15 times higher for pine coniferous forests, in particular pine forests. And one can say that, for example, the pine forests of Lugansk region, Oblast, are practically gone. There are none left, simply because of such an intensive warfare there, and very high vulnerability of pine to fires. So that's unfortunately the reality of the war. So this is a short-term perspective of what we believe needs to be done there, which is effectively assessing the current situation, keeping it on the radar and talking about it. So keep documenting the facts, improve ground data. With deoccupation now gradually liberating some of the areas in Ukraine, it's also possible to go to the field, even though the field is now loaded with unexploded ordnance, with mines. So it's difficult to go there, but it's still becoming possible. So get field evidence of things. Ukraine is working on it directly, the Ukrainian government. Use space data, the EU Copernicus is one of the tools which potentially can play a very important role there, but there are also other platforms. And also move to detailed studies, analyze cases, specific cases. For instance, around Kyiv, it's already possible to review the situation as a result of what happened in February, March. So one can actually deal with it in terms of sampling, laboratory analysis, and actually trying to quantify the damage. And then, of course, access damage also direct from ground combat, from the front line, from the shelling, the ordnance and mines is becoming possible as well. Damage to nature is quite difficult to assess because there is very little reporting about it. So this can only be done either indirectly by going to the field So this is a little bit a silent victim, which needs attention as well. And of course, advocacy and communication are very important now. So keep this on the radar. And then I have to say, I think if you said at the beginning that in fact the environmental legacy of this war is not necessarily very well known. In fact, in comparison to other conflicts, for example, the Middle East and Syria and Afghanistan, it's relatively well known. So in fact, surprising, there is quite a lot of talk about it, which is good. So actually the attention is becoming adequate. We just need to keep it on the agenda. And we need to move from pure information communication to action eventually, of course. The whole idea is that Ukraine will need recovery. And it's recovery of nature, recovery of the environment, but also the environment conscious recovery of Ukraine as such. It's, of course, very tempting to rebuild fast, and people need housing, and Ukraine needs industry. It's kind of tempting to do this very fast. So the challenge is to remember the environmental dimension. There is a Green Deal in Europe. Ukraine is aspiring for European membership, so it will be important to keep this on the radar as well, and make sure that this does happen. And then finally, just to reflect on the time scale, long-term perspective, the photo for this session had the First World War soldiers in trenches wearing gas masks. This is a map of the area around Verdun in France, where the trench war during World War I was one of the most intense, and a lot of legacy of the war has been left in the soil around this area, which used to be very agricultural before the war. And now some of the areas are still classified as zone rouge, the red areas, where you actually cannot undertake agricultural activities, where you still need to get rid of the toxics, which are still in the soil, still in the lands. And this is unfortunately probably what we have to anticipate for Ukraine. That some of the areas will take decades, if not multiple decades, to clean up to the level that they can be usable again. And remembering that Ukraine is part of Europe's breadbasket, and remembering how valuable land they are and how important it is for the population and for the world, of course, this puts this also in the global perspective. So the whole issue of the toxic impacts of this war and the toxic legacy of this war will be on the global agenda for years and decades to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Nikolai. This was really a very interesting and comprehensive view. I mean, not totally comprehensive, but considering the information we have, it gives us a very good view of what is going on. On the point you've raised and that you rightly noted about the question of the legacy, what I had in mind in saying that is that unfortunately, as the war is still going on, we can't have a full view of the legacy because unfortunately still other damages are coming. But you're right, this is one of the conflicts on which we do have information, and what you have proved, because this is coming from open sources, as you said. So this is data that is available, show that there is a possibility to monitor what is going on. And unfortunately, you very rightly mentioned other conflicts which will need just as much attention, but unfortunately has not been covered or monitored the same way, and we don't have all of the data. So I think it's very important to have in mind that there are a number of other regions where the conflicts are not finished, unfortunately, are still going on right now, and are a bit in the same situation, and we don't have the same environmental evaluation. But I think this is giving us a very good sense of these issues. And your last slide, going back to the First World War, was very useful for us to understand what does it mean in terms of the length of time that we have to have in mind when we're talking about recovering such a situation. Let me turn now to the special rapporteur, because of course you haven't dealt with the situation of Ukraine, as far as I'm aware, for the time being, because it's so recent. But as we heard with the Marshall Islands, but I know that you also followed what happened, for example, in the harbor in Beirut, which does have some links with the conflicts. I mean, the explosion in the harbor, which does have a link with the conflicts in the regions, and you've been looking at some other issues like that. So the question of the conflict, that you said already before, is on the radar map of the mandate, definitely. So very interested to hear your views on what we have just seen right now. Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eve, and thank you very much, Nikolai, for such an interesting presentation. A couple weeks ago, in the early days, months ago, in the early days of the war, several special procedures put out a statement which included references to the kinds of issues that we're talking here today. But more generally, I thought I'd make a couple of comments in terms of what this means in the arsenal, in the architecture, rather than arsenal, in the toolbox of tools available to deal with these issues. So if we look at prevention, the kinds of monitoring and reporting, the information gathering, the awareness and the visibility that comes about as a result of the work of civil society organizations like the one that Nikolai Denisov is working in and has described its work. This can help with prevention, weapons design, conduct of hostilities, to see what's happening on the ground. It has implications for what comes afterwards. And here in your before to last slide, Nikolai, you were talking about recovery, possible compensation, and that made me think about precedent that's often talked in international environmental law as it relates to human rights and armed conflict is the experience of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and the resolutions adopted by the Security Council setting up an international compensation commission, including with a mandate to secure compensation for environmental harm. In this instance, given the permanent members of a Security Council composition, that kind of engagement by that UN organ seems to be most unlikely to be able to pursue this. So we're left with the question of what kind of avenue, tool could be mobilized in order to secure an access to a remedy to those people that have suffered from environmental contamination and more generally to communities and the country as a whole. You've spoken, Nikolai, the focus has often been in this debate about armed conflict and the environment. I'll come back to that, but the issues are broader than that, as your slides point out. There's indirect pollution, contamination. Perhaps the word indirect is not the most felicitous, but the pollution that results from the attacks on industry more generally. Previously, we had heard from His Excellency from Marshall Islands on unexploded munitions. That may be a situation here too, which requires monitoring. So there's a lot that comes together, and it's not just the protection of the environment in times of armed conflict. It's the broader holistic situation of the environment of the country during the conflict, which is not the same. International environmental instruments have been developed to deal with the weaponization of the environment. The most known is perhaps the Environmental Modification Convention, ENMOD, for its acronym. That was heavily influenced by the use of Agent Orange by the United States in the Vietnam War, and these instruments they focus on the use of the environment as a tool for war. So gaining advantages of exploding hydroelectric dams or the like. Now that's a narrow piece of the puzzle. If we look at the International Criminal Court in its jurisdiction, we see that war crimes have taken that body of law and incorporated crimes where where environmental destruction is widespread and unnecessary in view of the military advantages to be obtained. The question is whether that body of law is sufficient to deal with the broader issues that we have seen in this presentation. And there, a recent document by the International Law Commission that has been submitted to principles on armed conflict and the environment, has submitted principles to the General Assembly for consideration, has included a principle on toxic remnants of war. And so this opens a very good opportunity, perhaps, and poses the question whether the time is right.
Okay, no problem. No, thank you very much. So picking up on this final idea that I was sharing, so we have a body of law that looks at a piece of the puzzle that is the weaponization of the environment, and that's in work and the war crimes under the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction. But the picture and the problem is larger than that, and the International Law Commission has recently concluded a set of principles on the interface between armed conflict and environmental protection that have been transmitted to the General Assembly for consideration. This document includes a reference to toxics and the toxic remnants of war. So it poses the question whether this is the right time to take this document, take that principle and unpack it. What does it mean in regards to the broader panoply of issues that are on the table in regards to reality as we're seeing it unfold in the Ukraine and unfortunately also in other places? I'll stop there. Thank you again for giving me the floor.
No, thank you very much, Marcus. So let me turn to the room to see if there were any questions here or online. And if it's not the case, then I will very quickly turn to you for a final concluding remark, Marcus. But this one it would be much more a remark at the end of this, the whole of the 2 days of the Toxic Free Talks. So we'd be very happy to hear your thoughts as a final conclusion. But before giving you the floor on that, I really want to thank Nikolai himself for his presentation, but also for the work that you are doing. Your maps, which are available for all of us on your websites, are extremely useful to understand some of the evolution, the environmental evolution of critical places. We are right now focusing on Ukraine, but as you said, you did a lot on the Central Asia. You did on a number of regions, and they're very useful for us to try to understand what is going on, what is the legacy, what are the real impact of the environment. I mean, you have direct impact on the people, but then you have how the war anyway will continue to have negative effects on people and on future generations because of the effects it had on the structure of the land by contamination or by depletion of natural resources, which take so much time then to have back. So I think this is a very, very important and very valuable work which helps us a lot. So once again, thank you for doing this work. Thank you for having for coming here and having shared it with us.
Thank you.
So Marcus, let me turn to you for if you would agree to give just a final word for ending these 2 days of the Geneva Toxic Free Talks for 2022. And if ever you have also proposals for the, let's say, the next free talks in 2023, Toxic Free Talks in 2023. So the floor is yours.
Well, once again, Yves, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and here also to the Geneva Environment Network and to Earth Justice for taking the lead in putting together the Geneva Toxic Free Talks. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes, so I really want to heartily thank the team that has made these talks possible. Yves, your leadership on setting a vision, on identifying issues, on convening is really remarkable. Thank you very much for all of that. I am incredibly pleased to have had the opportunity to be with you all here in Geneva in what appears to be coming together as September Toxics Month, not least because that is the month in which the Human Rights Council holds its session that receives the thematic report of the mandate on toxics and human rights. We've covered a lot of ground over these various days. I won't even begin to mention the range of issues that we've talked, but all of that can be covered within the umbrella of the right to a toxic-free environment, the right of everyone not to be exposed to hazardous substances. These are key elements of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And we see that as much as we talk about the challenges of implementation, there are still challenges in understanding better the realities in which these rights operate in order to improve the standards that are necessary to face them and provide real protections to people. In dealing with them, human rights cannot be absent from the conversation, and they are integral to legitimate and to effective solutions. So with that, we will, in terms of the mandate, continue onwards using the tools that are given to us by the human rights framework to confront the toxification on the planet and the dire consequences that that has for so many people, unfortunately, for so many people around the world. With that, there's a lot of time left for the next September, next year, to identify a whole range of topics that we could work on. But in the meantime, the mandate has its doors open. We are ready to engage with all of you, with those of you online. So I encourage you to come close to the mandate, send us information, send us communication, and let's explore how to work together and put this mandate in defense of the rights affected by toxic exposure. Thank you very much, Yves. Thank you very much, Diana. Back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus. Thank you to you for your participation to all of these events. It was really great to have with you and to be able to I mean, what is specific then to these type of discussions is that they're not just academic discussions, although we're so happy to have a number of academics who attended or participated, but it's also focused on what can the mandate achieve, how can it feed into the work of the mandate, and then the mandate itself is a driver for the human rights action in this field. So this is really the purpose of these type of talks, and I hope we've been able to achieve part of this during these talks over the last 2 days. Just to finish on saying that next year, indeed, it will be also an important year, because next September, the Council will be in the situation of renewing your mandate. We're not particularly worried about the renewal, but probably what is interesting is to make sure that the renewal continues to make it effective, and that it really gives you ways to be relevant to the situations that we have to face. So I think there's here a lot of input that can come from a number of constituencies who are concerned, actually from all of the constituencies who are concerned by your mandate, and that can be an interesting discussion to lead up to the September talk. So if ever it is possible, we'll be also holding some Geneva Toxic Free Talks before September, if that can be of any use in the preparation of what will come in next September. So with that, it's my turn to close these 2 days. Thanking everybody for being here with us online and in the room. And of course, I'm joining you, Marcus, with all what you said to the team of the Geneva Environmental Network. Without them, nothing of this would have been possible. It was great to have you in the room, because as I said already previously, it's sometimes frustrating because I was just thanking 1 or 2 persons, knowing that you have 2 or 3 others working behind the screen, and we don't see all the work you have to do. And we saw some of the challenges, the technical challenges that are going on. I don't know how many computers are online at the same time right now, coordinating each other. So it's a great work. It's great to work with your team, Diana. It's great to work with you. So a very warm thanks for all the support you're bringing us to our work. And I'm giving you back the floor.
Thank you very much, Yves. Marcus, we look forward to have you back in Geneva in person or virtually when there is an occasion to involve you in the important discussions ongoing here. We have the chemicals and waste hub of the UN system here in Geneva, with a lot of important discussions ongoing. So there are other opportunities than just the September session of the Human Rights Council to bring you back here. We would like to of course thank you, Yves, in helping us running all these series of events. And many others upcoming in between these talks. Just to remind to all the attendees that the summaries of this event will be available online as well as the videos, so you'll be able to also watch the sessions you were not able to attend. And as it was discussed, we will also have a more concrete report summarizing these days with a lot of the important points that came out in the discussion. So we want to thank who has followed us and all the speakers who engaged through the 2 days of the event. The links have been shared on the chat for who is online, for who is with us in the room. The links were in the screens and will be again. And here you have a slide of a few other events coming up, which are not, which are focusing on other topics. One being tomorrow, a briefing in preparations of the Environment for Europe conference that will take place in Nicosia. We are celebrating the 30 years of this process that was launched in Dobris in 1991. Another side event of the Human Rights Council on environmental human rights offenders that is coming up on the 5th of October. And a lot of conference of the parties of various conventions will take place in November and December. One of them is the CITES, so the convention that looks at endangered species. Their COP is going to take place in Panama, and we are having a briefing in preparation of that COP. And we will also hold briefings in preparation of the other major environmental negotiations of Panama. Sorry for this 1-2 minutes of publicity on the upcoming events. You find all this information on our website, as well as other useful resources on human rights and the environment. And so the link where you can find the videos and the summary is now on the screen. Thank you very much.